This is a really interesting fight for a lot of different reasons. You can go through the stats and pull them apart, and they're very interesting. You look at their records compared to one another, and that's very interesting. You consider their fighting styles and how they work against one another or potentially complement one another. So Dominick Cruz, of course, former champion, very, very unorthodox style, very erratic footwork, bouncing around, different movement patterns that we've seen from a lot of people. He's very good at kind of penduluming, is that a word? Well, we use it anyway. He kind of pendulums into the range of his opponents and swings his punches and then pendulums back out, and this kind of erratic bouncy footwork where he comes back and he does a little jog and takes a deep breath and then goes back in again. Like, you just watch people in front of him. Like, you watch Pedro Munoz in front of him and he's like, go on, you're gonna come into range in a minute, I'm gonna hit you, and then it's done. Oh, you got me. Okay, next time. And you see people kind of like readying themselves for the right opportunity, which almost never comes because it's so difficult to read. Like, sometimes he'll bounce into range and then out again, and they'll fire a punch and it won't land. Then he'll bounce into range and level change and threaten a takedown, and it's this constant like chaotic noise that he throws at his opponents, which first of all is exhausting, and second of all, it's very difficult to predict what's coming at you. Which is why he tends to have, a high striking accuracy, a high striking rate, high striking output. He tends to outpoint all of his opponents. But then, there are certain drawbacks to it. Chito Vera, on the other side, very, very different. He tends to get hit more than he lands. But even in the fights where he gets outstruck and he gets outlanded, he almost always does more damage to his opponents than they're able to do to him. I mean, if you look at his last fight against Rob Font, so against Rob Font, he landed 167 strikes. Now, if you think back to the end of that fifth round, or maybe even the beginning of the fifth round, which was a key because Rob Font looked like he'd been hit by a car, and Chito got up off his stool like a few seconds before the round and was tapping like, come on, we need to start the round. He recognized that Rob Font was kind of hanging out on his stool for a minute and gathering himself. He was bloodied, he was swollen. Like, he'd been knocked down in the second, third, and fourth round. Like, Chito was cruising in that fight. And at the end of the fight, he was doing a little lap celebrating before the bell went. He was confident that he'd won. And on the other side, Rob Font looked dejected. But then if you look at the total strikes landed, Rob Font landed 273 strikes on Chito Vera. That's a considerable number. That's over 100 more strikes. But he wasn't able to do the same kind of damage that Chito was able to do. And I expect Dominick Cruz to be able to outland Chito Vera. I expect him to hit Chito Vera more than he gets hit. But the difference is when Chito hits Dominick Cruz, it's going to really hurt. It's going to hurt a lot more than when Dom Cruz hits Chito. And that's one of the things that Chito is going to come into this fight with a lot of confidence in. I could just see this fight going so many ways. I mean, okay, so let's speculate, right? So say Dom Cruz comes in and he's real mobile and he's on his toes and he's stinging Chito Vera and he's outstriking him. He keeps getting clipped occasionally because that's what Chito does. He's going to stand in the pocket and land low kicks as Dom Cruz comes in. But say Dom Cruz is outpointing Chito Vera. Chito then is going to pick up the pace and start to push him back. He's going to try and close that distance down, and that's when it gets easier for Dom Cruz. Because when someone gets more eager to hit him, they tend to miss a lot more. If Marlon Vera is smart, he's gonna work from the ground up, and he's gonna work the lead leg, then he's gonna work the body and the head, because the head is the last thing you can hit on Dom Cruz, especially if you're aiming for it. Like, if you watch his fight against Pedro Munoz is constantly swinging for his head and missing, and it got to the point where he was wasting massive amounts of energy doing it. I mean, when he did connect, he hurt him, but he didn't connect a lot of times, and that was one of the reasons why Dom Cruz won that victory. Dominick Cruz has to make Marlon Vera miss. But in order to make him miss, he has to take those chances and put himself in the pocket. And to be there for 25 minutes, knowing how much damage Marlon Vera can do with a lot less strikes than his opponent lands, that is a risky equation for Dominick Cruz. If Marlon Vera, say, clips Dom Cruz, catches him rolling onto something, and the fight that I keep coming back to in my head is Brian Ortega against Clay Guida. It's a very similar way to how Cejudo caught Dom Cruz with that knee. Like, Dom Cruz's style is really good, like we've talked about, like the way he pendulums himself into range and then he skips out and then he swings back in again. But the moments where he dives off from one side to the next, almost always there's nothing covering his head. He's relying on his opponents not throwing in the direction that he's going because he's thrown them off in the other way. But if Chito Vera is smart, he's just going to be walking him down Muay Thai style and throwing kicks around the sides, because that's a good way of trapping someone that moves like that up against the fence a bit more. Now, the complexity of Dominick Cruz's footwork is going to be a real test for Chito Vera. I think there are very few people that can really deal with that kind of footwork. And what we see is the effect that Dominick Cruz has had on footwork in mixed martial arts. You know, the likes of Corey Sandhagen and TJ Dillashaw, you can see echoes of his footwork in their style. You know, the idea of switching stances, of being a lot more fluid and moving in and out of range and changing your timing. You know, Dominick Cruz is one of the pioneers of this style. There's always an antithesis to that style, though. And a hard-nosed, blunt force trauma, walk into range and take more shots than you land is what Chito Vera does, and that could be the kryptonite for Dominick Cruz. And if that's the case, then Dominick Cruz might start trying to work takedowns against Chito Vera.